Да.
Dear ladies and gentlemen, speech by Sergey Lavrov, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Russian Federation, is about to begin. Please proceed to your seats.
Английский канал, перевод, английский канал, переводчик, английский канал, перевод, перевод, английский канал, раз, два, три, четыре, пять, вышел зайчик погулять. Английский канал, перевод, перевод, английский канал, перевод, перевод, английский канал.
Уважаемые дамы и господа, начинается выступление министра иностранных дел Российской Федерации Сергея Лаврова. Пожалуйста, займите ваши места в зале.
Dear ladies and gentlemen, speech by Sergey Lavrov, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Russian Federation, is about to begin. Please proceed to your seats.
На сцену приглашаются министр иностранных дел Российской Федерации Сергей Лавров,
Please welcome to the stage Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Russian Federation Sergey Lavrov,
модератор Александр Дынкин, президент ММО имени Примакова РАН, академик РАН,
Moderator Alexander Dynkin, President of Primakov Institute of World Economy and International Relations, full member of the Russian Academy of Sciences.
Добрый день, уважаемые.
Hello.
Добрый день.
Hello. Hello. Today we have the meeting with the Minister of Foreign Affairs as a keynote speech at the Primakov Reading. Yesterday I said that one of these added value of Primakov Readings an opportunity to see and meet with people who are responsible for foreign policy of our country. Yesterday you saw Mr. Ushakov, Mr. Ryabkov, Mr. Prishko. Today we have Sergey Lavrov. But our tradition is to talk a little bit with Mr. Lavrov. He's going to dwell on the approaches to the modern world, and then we will have Q&A session.
Саша Грушко сегодня здесь.
But I see Sasha Alexander Grushko right here.
Вы только раз в году рассчитываете общаться.
If you want to speak to our employees just once a year, without any conferences, we're ready to meet with you. But you know that every week we are in communication with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Thank you. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, first of all, I would like to congratulate Mr. Dymkin, the staff of the Institute of World Economy and International Relations, after Mr. Primakov of the Russian Academy of Sciences, with the 70th anniversary, which was celebrated in April current year. I'd like to wish colleagues good health, success, aspirations, and all the best. I appreciate the opportunity. It's a great privilege for me to speak at the Primakov Readings, which have brought together very distinguished specialists, officials, scholars, experts from Russia and many countries around the world. The participation in this forum is the tribute and commemoration to Yevgeny Primakov, his distinguished character, his great heritage, his ideas fully being relevant in our work today. We have mentioned numerously on this stage that in the mid-90s of the previous century, when in the West they saw the rise of the whole epoch of their global dominance, Primakov saw, forecast and shape the rise of multipolarity and started to shift Russian international and foreign affairs vessel into a more just and polycentric world order. This is a metaphor, but in practical work, these particular development manifested in literal shift, not of the vessel, but the aircraft. That's what you probably know, when he understood that he was on his way to the country which had started another aggression. The life itself proved the reliability of his forecast and cancelling the surface forecast about the rise of the end of the history, who promoted alternative, free, ultra-liberal development models 3 decades ago in his program article, International Relations at the 20th Century, and Mr. Primakov underlined, and I quote, "Not single state has sufficient power to tackle the legion of problems on its own," the end of quote. So with a big delay, this understanding finds its way among separate representative of political and intellectual elites of the West. About a year ago, the State Secretary Marco Rubio publicly said, and I quote, "The United States cannot tackle global problems alone." The end of quote. Moreover, at the meeting in February 2025 at Riyadh, when following the initiative of the Trump administration, we had a meeting with Marco Rubio in February 2025. That was my quote, the aid to the President on Security, and Mr. Ushakov and Mark Rubio, representing the foreign policy of the second Trump administration, said very important words, particularly in connection to the necessity to cooperate, accepting the national interests of both parties. It is necessary to cooperate. We shouldn't lose the chance in those cases when these national interests align and when they are different, which is the case in most situations. We should avoid the degradation and erosion and turning it into hard confrontation. The other thing is that understanding of incapability of maintaining this hegemony alone hasn't created a situation when the West, in general, in the United States, is ready to accept the realities of these multipolar developments. They prefer to strengthen their weakening positions through imposing global majority and forcing them to play by their rules through sanctions, constraints, illegitimate measures of different nature. And undoubtedly, the West doesn't want to follow, it has never followed fully, the international law enshrined in the Charter of the UN, when everyone ratified and signed and committed to following these norms and rules of international law indivisibly. This is sovereign equality of the state, non-interference with domestic affairs, respect for the right to self-expression and determination, and guarantees of human rights regardless of the race, gender, language, and religion. This is a quote of the Charter of the UN. I did it on purpose. You know that the language, religion are not under protection of the UN Charter in Ukraine, but under the control of neo-Nazis mob. And the West turns a blind eye on it. All the principles I have enumerated are either not followed or they are followed by their choice. That's how they see it fit to promote their interests in a specific stage of the history, to the detriment of other participants and players of international relations, to the detriment of the whole integrity of the international law system. When Kosovo was proclaimed independent without any referendum, amid no conflict, amid no armed conflict, it is accepted. But when in response to the coup d'etat and the armed militants who wanted to attack the parliament office in the Crimea, and the Crimean people made a decision to reunite with Russia, it is categorically unaccepted, as there is no self-determination, self-expression right, but there is a territory integrity. So these double standards have manifested themselves, particularly in relation to Greenland. When the official representative of the Secretariat of the UN was asked a question at the press conference what he thinks about the statement of Mr. Trump in his policy towards Greenland, he said the following: "We are for tackling this problem, following the principles of international law, territorial integrity of Denmark, and the right for the self-determination of the nation." And the journalist asked whether this equation can be applied to Ukraine and to the Crimea. No, only the territorial integrity principle should apply. This is the representative for the General Secretariat of the UN. Most major posts in the whole UN system are the members of NATO countries. I mean, citizens of NATO countries. So we see in such a behavior of our Western countries, these games without rules or power game, that's the global minority is trying to impose on global majority. The specificity of the current moment is that the West is ready to change their attitude even to the rules, which they have been trying to use to replace the international law. Whenever they felt in the West that the free trade, fair competition IP, the movement of capital, allowed creating new centers of attraction in Asia, Africa, Latin America. They turned dollar and other global currencies into weapons. They started sanctions and tariff wars and started to deprive countries of their foreign exchange and other tangible assets, undermining the achievements of their own child. The economic globalization and the future of this economic globalization is being destroyed by the West, and the foundation which had been created within the international security system. NATO categorically refuses not to use their oral commitments to the USSR leaders and new Russia leaders, but even political commitments made by the West, which are on paper, not oral ones, but on paper, signed by the leaders of the Western countries together with us at summits of the OSCE in Europe. They are not ready to give us the right to the indivisible and equal security as a principles enshrined in the documents I have mentioned. The security is indivisible. No one has a right to strengthen security to the detriment of the security of other countries. No single country or group of countries or organization have no right to pretend to be dominant in the Euro-Atlantic area. It's quite clear, and that's what NATO is doing right now. It is trying to promote its dominance. I believe we shouldn't even explain these things to the audience we have today. Russia has been dealing with irresponsible trajectory and development of NATO. They are expanding eastward at our borderline. But we're also very cautious about the aspiration of NATO for a global military technological supremacy and expanding the interests of this NATO for the whole Eurasian and Asian Pacific region. We can see that it has been happening long ago, and Mr. Stoltenberg, the General Secretary of NATO, was asked at the press conference when he started talking about Indo-Pacific aspirations. He was asked a question. NATO seems to be dealing with the member countries' security issues. He said, yes, but at this particular stage, he said, the threat to the territorial integrity of our country members also stem from Taiwan Strait, the Southeast Asia, and all these regions. So they are actively developing their activity over there. Among the current manifestations of the policy undermining the global stability, the activity of the United States in Venezuela under the pretense of fight against drug trafficking that just ended up in the Maduro case, and now the United States controls the quite profitable oil industry. What Mr. Trump said the other day, when aggressive line faces the challenges or is in deadlock, the West starts to think about diplomacy, about the necessity to find common ground, to meet each other halfway. Russia supports the agreements on the ceasefire between the Iran and the United States, support negotiations which are going on. We are ready to assist in working out comprehensive long-term treaty between these two countries, and in the context of a wider settlement, including the neighboring countries. If our assistance is required, we do expect that the renewal of free movement of marine vessels in the Strait of Hormuz will only facilitate the development of the global South countries, and stabilization of political military situation in the Gulf area can be prerequisite for a wider dialogue over a new architecture of security and cooperation in this strategically important region in the Middle East and in general. Quite recently, at the end of May, Russia continued our long-term efforts to facilitate this process and renewed concept of creating a system of collective security in the Gulf area. We circulated this paper to the neighboring countries, coastal countries, because they are those who determine whether this document is going to be interesting and feasible. But that's how we did before, promoting our concept many years ago. Participation of other neighboring countries is possible. And it should include the countries which are not regional players, if regional players are interested in such an initiative. I do expect that the representative of the academic and expert community will contribute to working out the parameters of such collective security system in the Gulf area. The concept stipulates, just in brief, gradual promotion and movement to resolving the conflict situations, to build trust and capacities among coastal countries, and harmonization and alignment of these regional countries with international players who do participate in stabilizing and facilitating cooperation in the Gulf area and in the Middle East in general. To reach these goals, it will require diplomacy, diplomatic art, and strife of all stakeholders, like it is a case with the Arab-Israel conflict resolution, which has been a serious source of regional and international turbulence for decades, and which is at the background of the global agenda right now. It is clear that to unbundle this conflict knot can be done only through removing historical obstacles to Palestine and to the people of Palestine, helping them to implement the right stipulated in the UN for creating independent, feasible state with following the interest of Israel in the security domain. We can speak at length, which is actually happening, that the situation on the ground make this prospect almost impossible, but not only international law, but the moral justice in this matter is on the side of Palestine. We shouldn't forget about this. Right now we witness how rejecting all the resolutions of the UN in this area, and even under the threat of the resolution adopted autumn last year, which actually contains a roadmap for the strip of Gaza without any word on the western bank of Jordan. But this resolution offered a new approach, didn't even say a word about the new state foundation. Even this resolution faces the wall. Together with China, we abstained and we didn't use veto because we were asked to do so by our Arab friends, including Palestine. So the experience of long-term diplomacy says only one thing, that the golden rule in long-term resolution of conflicts is eradication of root causes. That is true. Eradication of root causes of conflicts is one of the principles, initiatives of Mr. Xi initiatives, which he proposed in February 2023 when he talked about global security issues. And the objective to eradicate root causes relates to the Ukrainian crisis, which was artificially generated by the West in the context of this expansion I've mentioned, eastward by NATO to the Russian borders, which so we need to realize a simple nature of things. The adversaries of Russia shouldn't be ignoring our warnings about the threats to our national security, which cannot be accepted in violation of any possible commitments to the right to the Russian-speaking and Russian language, the use of Russian language in mass media, Russian culture, and Orthodox Ukrainian Church. I absolutely positive that the settlement of the situation in Ukraine through political and diplomatic measures is still possible. That's what President Putin has said numerously, to do that, we need to have legally binding guarantees in security based on the principle of its indivisible nature, including the security for Russia in the West territories. The West should understand, the sooner the better, at geo-economic, military, and ideological expansion plans in the area with Russian vital interests should be abandoned. And as for the enforcement of rights of our compatriots, that's what I have said. This is an integral part of the whole equation, which shouldn't just be a thing to negotiate. So this is the obligation, regardless of anything. The Charter of the UN and the Constitution of the Ukraine guarantee the rights of the Russians and other minorities. However, they have adopted a law which contradicts that. In August last year, the leaders of Russia and the United States reached a number of agreements on political trajectories to find a way out of this conflict. We're still committed to these agreements. Actually, the United States worked out this agreement, and President Putin just accepted those proposals after detailed, scrutinized elaboration of that. So the ball is not on our side right now, but we see that they're trying to play in offside area. If we speak football terms, it will not be accepted. For Russia, it is a vital matter, and to find a common ground and to look for these interim solutions and to accept the ultimatum dictated by someone, this is not going to happen. And this needs to be taken into account by some officials in the Western countries, which are pumping the Kiev regime with arms and weapons at the same time, trying, and probably they buried the outcome of encouraging Alaska. They're trying to impose a vision of negotiation as the process for Russia's defeat. Such a behavior doesn't speak high of those who want to call themselves politicians, and such behavior, such code of conduct will bring to no results. No positive results. As a responsible power, Russia is ready to open dialogue with those who are ready to hold this dialogue in earnest. This is the main thing. And based on the mutual respect and equality principles, while Europe and the West in general haven't understood that, we will continue our work with global majority on the positive agenda. We still have a lot of work to do. Multipolarity is not doomed. Multipolarity doesn't doom the world for chaos and confrontation. That's what is being said by the critics of multipolarity, and the balance of interest based on the international law is achievable. That can be proved by the Russian-Chinese relations, particularly the comprehensive partnership and strategic cooperation that can be regarded as an ideal image of cooperation between two superpowers.
The foreign political bond between Moscow and Beijing supports international stability and offers a model of secure and fair future. The shapes and outlines of such a security systems have been highlighted more than once in the statements following the results of the Russian-Chinese summit meeting, and once again we reiterated that in a declaration that was adopted by the leaders of China and Russia in the course of President Putin's visit to China regarding the nascence of a multipolar world and the strategic relations of a new type. I do think that the expert community paid a lot of attention to that document. Let me also mention our privileged strategic partnership relations between Russia and India that have a rich history. And we continue their full development. At the same time, we stand up for the facilitation and acceleration of our relations within BRICS, Russia, India, and China, which cropped out many years ago following the initiative of Yevgeny Primakov. And BRICS, this is an example of how a multilateral cooperation could be arranged, and the philosophy close to the heart of other countries that are seeking to pursue independent foreign political course and promote, first of all, the national interests. those who are not ready to accept the Western-centric concept of the primary leaders and secondary leaders are very much interested in the SCO and BRICS, and our cooperation rests on the mutual respect and the search for consensus in some disputes, even if it is very hard to find. So once such a solution is obtained, it may serve as a guarantee of common interests. That's why the number of those who want to accede to BRICS and the SCO is growing. The countries of Latin America and of Africa are there, and we're quite optimistic about the future of those alliances that reflect the realities of a multipolar world, much better than G7, for instance, does. And we are not making friends with someone against anyone. We are developing every nation member of those alliances and the alliance in general. And analyzing the summit meeting of G7, G7 is still stuck to deterring and confining Russia and China, and unilateral approaches, as Evgeny Primakov wrote, only provoke rivalry and, at the end of the day, chaotic and unpredictable drift in the international relations. I already said that one of the basic rules behind the functioning of a fair world order is that we have to find regional solutions to regional problems, and a special role among the regional problems certainly belongs to the Eurasian continent, which is home to several ancient civilizations and which concentrates lots of natural resources and potential. The Eurasia has to be developed following the modern terms, and it is called for by the initiative of President Putin to create the Greater Eurasian Partnership. This is the topic that would be discussed at the fourth Minsk meeting, where the Minsk Charter of Multipolarity and Diversity would be discussed. And let me stress, we are not claiming the monopoly, in the sense that we are ready to consider all other initiatives regarding the development of Eurasia, including within the SCO, within a very well-known initiative from Kazakhstan, such as SICA. But certainly, the Eurasian initiative has to reflect it in the international relations. Eurasia, this is the biggest continent with now unified structure. There are lots of sub-regional structures, but not one unified structure. So in Latin America and in Africa, there are lots of integration projects. And, for instance, that's the Caribbean and Latin American Union, and that's the African Union, the initiative proposed by President Putin. Do not exclude, do not rule out the participation of any single state, any single alliance located in Eurasia, and that are ready to diligently work on providing stability and flourishing. And we would be happy if certain contribution to that process is made by the participants in the Primakov Readings, promoting the intellectual component of those initiatives. As President Putin mentioned quite recently, speaking at the ceremony of meeting the ambassadors, so the multiple world has to be built together, and by means of an everyday medical work, we have to find the solution to the key problems of the modern times. I'm convinced that our forum is held exactly on such a historical moment. Thank you. Your Excellency, Mr. Lavrov, thank you so much for congratulating us on the occasion of the 70th anniversary of IMMO. Thank you for remembering Evgeny Primakov, and thank you for your comprehensive overview of the current situation. Colleagues, we still have some time in order to ask questions to Sergey Lavrov. Raise your hands, please. And please introduce yourself. Yes, I recognize you. Pass the mic, please.
Thank you very much indeed for your time. My name is Manuel Galileo.
Can you introduce yourself, please?
Yes, my name is Manuel Galileo from the London School of Economics. My country, the United Kingdom, is undergoing extreme political upheaval. We're going to have a new prime minister, and this is the same for other European countries. My question, Foreign Minister, is what are your prospects for medium and long-term improvement of relations with Europe? And indeed, what are the preconditions to achieve so? Спасибо большое.
Thank you so much. Well, in essence, President Putin spoke a lot about that, and I commented on that as well. So the ball is not in our court. That's a question to be asked to our European neighbors, the former partners in a number of structures, such as Russian NATO Council, and strategic partnership with the EU, and G7 used to be G8. There were lots of formats where we communicated, and it helped us to understand better each other. And certainly we could not reach 100% agreement, just like there is now total agreement within G7 or within any format. There is now absolute agreement, but such formats helped us to share views, comments, receive the feedback, and all of a sudden it was interrupted, not by us. You'd rather ask that question to your colleagues. You're going to have to change your prime minister, and probably the society will discuss what to do next. I do think that this is high time to ask those questions. Speak about negotiations. Mr. Starmer used to say that negotiations are not needed, that they have to milk Ukraine. And actually, they didn't speak, they rather did. They did everything to make sure that Ukraine goes on and ramp up its terrorist activity. And without U.S. direct help in homing, in setting targets, that won't be possible to do what Ukraine now is doing, committing the terrorist attacks against Russia. Regarding your question, that probably concerns not only the UK but other Western countries, the European countries, first of all, that severed any potential contacts with Russia and started looting our resources. And speak about looting, and I just remembered, they seized, as you know, the gold currency reserves. That's the Brussels Euroclear. And yesterday or today, we learned that 6.5 billion either dollars or euro received from the Russian gold reserves were transferred to Ukraine. And over the last 4 years, 45 billion euro were transferred to Ukraine. And we were told that this is not from that part of the gold reserves, the contribution of the central bank that is enshrined in the agreement, but these are the interests that were received on top of what the Central Bank of Russia is entitled to. But still, this is our money which is robbed. So you are entitled to the interest agreed between us and Euroclear. And we have to be free to use that money, to dispose of that money. But once actually your money is arrested, is seized, and someone actually is getting benefits from that and is transferred to Ukraine, you know, that's a very serious thing in terms of attempts made by the West to convince everyone that the world order that they have created and that existed under the current global governance institutions such as the World Bank, the IMF, that those institutions are still relevant. What they do undermines the whole globalization system that, by the way, is already fragmented and would disintegrate further. Even President Trump, when he explained to the people what position is proposed by the United States and what they achieved in the war against Iran, and why they have to unfreeze Iranian money. He said, no, we have to give Iranian money back to Iran, otherwise we would undermine the trust to dollar. And the same principle could be used for other huge reserves and money that are frozen in the West. So the undermining of the reputation of the US dollar and other currencies that are being used that are being weaponized, that understanding will become even more clear. So let me find a quotation regarding contacts. President Emmanuel Macron, following the results of summit meeting of G7 in Avian and following the results of the European Union in Paris, he made a lot of statements, and he said that's not a question of who and how is going to negotiate with Russia, but the question is how Russia, that throughout many recent months received a lot of propositions, would say that it is prepared for negotiations between Russia and Ukraine in presence of the Europeans and the Americans. And by the way, he said the priority of the West is the military and other type of aid to Ukraine, exercising pressure on Russia. But nevertheless, we are ready to receive message from Russia. Was he serious? Mr. Costa says the European Union is not discussing negotiations with Russia, but how to beef up the pressure on Russia. I said that the European Union cannot be a mediator because it is fully on the Ukrainian side, but it has to be at the negotiations table. Tell me, what can we discuss if they proceed from such a stance? Are they actually prepared to sign the surrender of Russia? This is totally not commensurate to the role played by Europe in the global affairs. It shows clearly that the neocolonial mindset, neocolonial ambitions are still alive and drive many positions and many initiatives in Europe. And we don't have aliens. I'm not sure whether we have the live streaming. Well, we used to have some contacts. And President Macron criticized and reprimanded Antonio Costa for the fact that his employee 2 times got in touch with some Russian representatives in Moscow, and he has said that this is not acceptable, that we have to gather and to address that issue. That's a hypocrisy, because it was President Macron who sent his envoys, and they were received. And frankly speaking, they were envoys from London. We never actually reject the propositions to come and to discuss something, and President Putin knows that. But we know the price of such talks and negotiations. Well, if you're interested, on April 24, 2025, Emmanuel Macron, speaking at a press conference in Madagascar, said the only thing we need in terms of Ukraine is that President Putin stop lying. And then he sends his envoys, his messengers. Then his foreign minister says the colonial obsession of Putin depletes Russia and discredits the Russian nation. How do you like it? Merz, on the 2nd of September, said that President Putin is the war criminal, probably the cruelest war criminal of our times. And then these people say, we're going to wait until Russia agrees to start negotiations. Another interesting thing, and that's Merz who said, just like in 1938 in Sudets region was not enough, Putin would not stop at that. And that's the German who says that. The same German said that if we make concessions to Putin, that would be equal to attempts to appease to Hitler. So these are the guys who are working with you, and you made the Brexit, but now you intend to get back. But President Putin is a very patient person and very polite person. And he said, we never refuse from contacts that can bring benefit to us, and that any our neighbor needs, or any other country needs in order to convey their concerns. So if people come to us and repeat those quotations, and it doesn't make any sense. When 3 ambassadors from the UK, Germany and France asked to receive them in Russia's foreign ministry after that meeting in London with Zelensky in July, and my deputy received them. And they said, we want the Ukrainian crisis to be resolved, that Europe plays its role. And my deputy, Mikhail Galuzin, outlined our position. He said, what do you propose? What are the principles for settlement? What is your contribution? And they said, this is our contribution. The statement made on June the 7th in London, and probably you're familiar with that. So Russia has to surrender. Russia has to stop on the contact line, and kind of an occupation stabilization mission is going to be deployed on the western side, to the west from that contact line, and the Russian assets would be seized until actually Russia pays all the indemnities. So this is their contribution. Do you think we would even think about suggesting certain ideas to our Western partners? Whatever we could suggest in the 1990s, in the North years, what was operational benefited everyone. And so they decided to abandon all those benefits in detriment to Europe, first of all. We know how we're going to address those problems, and if Europe really has any constructive ideas, and so some new people are coming to power in some individual countries in Europe, probably we'll be ready to listen to them, and once we listen to them, then we will make some conclusions whether this is okay for us or not. But actually, we don't have to. We will not rely in terms of our foreign policy. We will not rely on expectations of Europe. We have no right to do that. Samir Saran, over to you.
Thank you. Minister Lavrov, Excellency, thank you so much for your speech. You mentioned the BRICS. And of course, we have in the last years doubled the members of BRICS. We have many countries who are now partner countries and many more who want to become part of BRICS. They all come with aspiration for BRICS. So my question for you as Minister, should BRICS be focusing on limited number of core issues so that we can achieve success in those issues? Or should we be engaging on a wider number of aspirations that every member has for BRICS?
Thank you. BRICS, as you've said, has doubled full-fledged members from 5 to 10 countries. The decision was made. It's not a simple decision. It was BRIC, but then South Africa joined BRICS. When it is one country which joins, there are also some matters which should be clarified to move forward and ahead. But BRICS turning into the grouping with 10 countries. The decision was made to give some time for alignment, harmonizing interests, finding common ground among all the countries which are in this grouping. It was the right decision to make. In India, at the BRICS summit, there was a quite hard talk between our Iranian and Emirate friends. That was the most difficult period in the situation. But we managed, regardless of emotional evaluations on both sides, we managed to make this executive document accepted by everyone. But there are other examples which are deep in the economic interest, which clash each other. So it was decided not to force any agenda and the expansion of the grouping for a couple of years, but the countries inside BRICS and partner countries are participating in these events, and that creates the ground for BRICS to have more universal dimension. As for the agenda, BRICS is not an organization. This is the grouping, which is a big advantage to create the structure like that. It's not right at this particular stage. The structure of the global importance, not the continental, not the regional. We do have the UN, and there is Peace Council initiated by Trump. You know that what confuses many experts. So Russia will not be the country to propose additional red tape in BRICS. Now the agenda is set by the president, which is on a rotating basis in BRICS. That's how the experience shows. Next president is trying to maintain consistency. During the Indian presidency, we are actively working on those initiatives which were proposed by Russia during Kazan summit in 2024. You know, we need to be realistic. There are a lot who strive for BRICS. That's what we are inspired for and inspired for. That's what is our underlying foundation is. We'll be seeking formats of a partner-based format, and then probably it will be time to expand BRICS. Svetlana, Ms. Sherenkova, please. Mr. Lavrov, Svetlana, from Bulgaria, the Institute of Leadership in Sofia. Let me ask a question which is a pain point for our country. Apart from the economic and military blocks, there is a civilizational reality. And Bulgaria, Russia are in this Slavic Orthodox reality where Russia is a leader, undoubtedly. So the other day you said that there are bigger pragmatic voices in Europe right now how to resolve the conflict in Ukraine, and our president has joined these voices who became the head of the government elected by the majority. I believe that he was elected since from the very first day of the special military operation has been saying that Russia cannot be defeated on the battlefield. You need to start talking, you need to exercise diplomacy with Russia, and you shouldn't think about European security excluding Russia from this process. To this particular extent, in this sense, my question to you is, so based on the objectives set by the President Putin at the beginning of the special military operation, these objectives and goals haven't changed. Do you believe that at the current stage of the conflict, what are the conditions when Moscow is ready to sit at a negotiating table and to start diplomatic talks? Thank you. We were at the negotiating table or near the negotiating table from the very beginning of the current stage of the Ukrainian degradation and erosion of the state. When in 2013, the end of 13, the beginning of 2014, after Maidan coup d'etat, which was mastered and arranged by the West only because President Yanukovych understood that if he signed the Treaty on Association with the EU, he would lose a right to participate in CIS free zone area. It's totally pragmatic move. So they didn't accept that, and President Putin was ready to help. We approached Barroso. He was the head of Euro Commission, and we proposed a triangular meeting between Russia, Ukraine, and the EU. If you want to have tariff-free with Ukraine, but we also have tariff-free trade, but we are protected against European goods when we join WTO. So evidently, it cannot happen. And Barroso told us it's none of your business because we do not interfere with your trade with Canada, for instance, something like that. And negotiations after this Maidan confrontation started. There was our representative, but when it was clear that the leaders of Ukraine was giving up its sovereign rights, we withdrew our representative, but we were not against the fact that they would sign this treaty. Mr. Yanukovych was a legitimate president, but we don't want to associate somehow with the position which the West squeezed out of him through threats and humiliation. They signed the agreement with opposition. They were going to create the government of national unity for 6 or 5 months. Then presidential election. Before the election, the president doesn't use his mandate. But we'll actually manage the security service, which protect him. He just gave up everything. Many people called Putin, and Obama called Putin, don't block this, please don't veto this. So if it is a decision of the current legitimate president, and if what can I do about that? So President Yanukovych signed, and in the morning, the opposition took over all the offices and state buildings. Yatsenyuk was on Maidan and asked, so you can congratulate us, we've created the government of victories. So we signed the agreement yesterday, and today we have created another government. So the first instinct was about abolishing the Russian language status, and then the activity of the armed militia towards the Crimea. At the next negotiations of a Normand nature, we were direct participants. We believed that these 17 sleepless hours spent in Minsk in 2015 will not end up in nothing. It was our initiative to approve this document within the Security Council. It was approved with the Security Council, and a couple of years ago, Merkel, Hollande, and Poroshenko, who signed this document together with Putin, said that they were not going to fulfill any clauses of this document. They wanted to have extra time because Ukraine was weak at this time then. We participated in the third round of negotiations, which was proposed by Ukraine at the beginning of the special military operation in Istanbul. You all know these facts. So Ukraine brought a document with the principles which it proposed to underlie the following document. These principles created and worked out by Ukraine were actually prepared by the president, and then Boris Johnson came to Ukraine. This is an answer to the question of our British colleague. The British do participate in different instances, but they're not expecting us to ask them to do something, not to do something. And after that, we saw Istanbul negotiations, which then were held in Geneva and in Abu Dhabi, and our delegation was headed by Mr. Medinsky. They included military specialists, the representative of economic ministry, and it stopped a year ago when after another round of negotiation, the Ukrainians said, you know, this is a weak negotiating initiative of the heads of low level, and we are discussing only humanitarian matters. We heard that, and we said to them, all right, we see. We proposed increasing, I cannot tell you which level, but increasing the level of the officials leading the delegations, and we proposed creating two workforces. in humanitarian and political military domains. They stepped aside. They didn't respond to our initiative. In autumn last year, several months, they said that they were not interested in these negotiations anymore. That's it. When Zelensky actually demands negotiations and other negotiation, just look for the quotes of 2023, 2024, 2025, when the UN and the whole government of Europe claimed that no negotiations with Putin were possible. Even Zelensky said that the compromise for Ukraine will be in the fact that Putin is alive. Just read his quotes. And this person is govern the whole Europe, and he wants to govern the United States as well. So we're open to negotiation at any period of time, but that's supposed to be serious proposal. Moreover, the process with Medicinski participation is not over. A lot of interesting proposals are on the table, but I quoted at the beginning of my interactive part the statements by Macron, by Costa and others. They say this is the ultimatum, so we're not intermediaries and mediators. We will sit at the negotiating table. It's only you who don't want these negotiations. This is total insanity. This is absolutely insane position and stance. So we're always ready, but I would like to reiterate, when we sit at this negotiating table, if on the other side there are reasonable ideas, proposals, and sane people, we will not trust anyone's word, but what we are proposed, ceasefire on the front line, and then negotiations. We did that when in Istanbul we had agreements, and as a gesture of goodwill, and the president said numerously that we moved our troops out from Kyiv, and we got Boris Johnson with his initiative, and Bucha. 3 days, everything was calm, and the mayor of Bucha spoke in front of TV, and in 3 days it was a group of BBC journalists and recorded the corpse in clean clothes in mud on the major highway of this Bucha. It's a big street, wide street. You know, the fact that you couldn't find them on the street, it was just insanity. Everybody understands what happened. There was a research paper released in the West, how this story unfolded. Of course, just a British plan. They started to create buzz out of this, making fuss out of this in information field. And so they adopted another set of sanctions, and it was one of the arguments which Boris Johnson used, and actually forced Zelensky not to sign a document and to continue the war from that period of time. Every time when we just send a request, official request to the Human Rights Council, to the Secretary General, to our Prosecutor's Office, to our Law Enforcement Agency, and they haven't yet given any answer. I asked Guterres, Secretary General, during the official meeting and publicly in the Security Council of the UN, if you don't have any information, could you please, as a UN, as a Human Rights Council, which is a part of the UN, officially make a request to the Ukrainians asking for the list of names of people whose corpse you've shown on TV on the BBC channel. 3 years we have been trying to do that, to get any response, but in vain. First we were told that, it would create risks for relatives. What kind of risk for the relatives? Which relatives are you talking about? Not a single case when any relative popped up. If relatives were killed, if they tortured, if the violence happened in other different situations, the relatives would just kick the doors of the human protection and human rights organizations. We're not going to leave it in the form it is right now. I keep on raising this matter. In April, I sent official letter to Guterres, Secretary General, and no reply yet. But I do understand Guterres is a biased person. I have proved that, and he has proved that, undertaking some actions expected by the Western countries, particularly confronting Russia. I was more baffled by the fact that every time when I go to New York and participate in General Assembly of the UN since the beginning of the special military operations, during the press conference, the whole group of correspondents and journalists at the UN full assembly hall, around 80 people, I know many of them by face. And along with other topics highlighted in the course of the press conference, I give this situation, I highlight the situation with Bucha, official requests. It's like kind of knocking at the wall. Can we just see your journalist activity and you can tackle and start these journalist investigation? Every year I keep on saying that no one has done anything in this respect. We are ready for negotiations, but, scamming us is not acceptable anymore. Sometimes we are quite naive. We might be crooked or misled, but we are particularly alert right now. Mr. Bakasaran, over to you, please.
It's a pleasure to listen to you on this occasion. My name is Pankaj Saran. I had the pleasure of being India's ambassador to Russia for a few years, and I'm associated with the relationship for many, many years. I just wanted to take this a little forward and ask you, in the run-up to the US elections in 2023-24, most of the Republican candidates, including at that time President Trump, were making very frontal statements on the Ukraine war and basically saying that this is a war that should never have happened, and that they were basically opposed to the war. It was a fundamentally different position from the Democrats. And then last year, President Trump himself has repeatedly said that this war was a mistake and that he had committed to resolve it. And then there were huge differences between the Europeans and the Americans precisely on this question. What I wanted to ask you was, do you see that this is a window of opportunity with the presence of someone like President Trump at the White House and with his own view about the Ukraine conflict for finding a solution to the conflict? And there was a lot of encouraging signs last year, starting from Anchorage and other meetings and negotiations. Do you think this window is still open? And related to this, do you think there is any parallel or any proof of concept, so to say, that is visible in the US-Iran deal when it comes to the Ukrainian conflict in terms of the framework, the sequencing, etc.? Thank you.
Thank you. I will try not to forget about what you started speaking at the first hand. So, we welcomed the position of President Trump when he was re-elected, and when he said that he wants to start a dialogue with Russia and contribute to the resolution of the Ukrainian crisis. And that's an absolutely normal position of a normal politician. Unlike those who now are leading the European countries, who severed all the ties with us, and the same was the position of Joe Biden. Well, it was a very pleasant difference from those who even rejected the dialogue and dialogue. This is the very essence of diplomacy in politics. And President Trump called President Putin, and we agreed that actually we're going to meet Marco Rubio in Riyadh. There was a very good meeting, and we spoke about very conceptual things. The new U.S. administration, and I referred to Marco Rubio, he said, actually, certainly it follows MAGA principle. It means not dissemination or proliferation of the ideology, but rather protection of the national interests, the way they understand that in Washington. And, he added, we fully recognize that other countries may have their own interests, and where our interests converge, that's the right case, we're going to cooperate. And actually, it would be a mistake not to make some win-win. And where the interests diverge, which is a more often case, that would be crime to actually allow that diversion to translate into degradation and severing relations. Speak about Ukraine, the Americans, it was in February 2025, they tried to find a way how to approach that conflict. But it was clear that Americans understand the root causes, unlike their European friends. And the root cause, and President Trump more than once said that there should be no NATO for Ukraine. And many times since he came to power, he said that he understands very well the position of the Russians, that no one wants to have such a military irritate close to its borders. And President Trump stressed that actually such a position cropped out much before Putin, and we have to forget about that. So that's the main country in NATO, and its president unanimously and said what he thinks about that. And then sometime later, in a year's time, where Marco Rutte speak about Ukraine, he said that the doors to NATO are open for Ukraine, not now, not instantaneously, but in future. And we thought, when President Trump came to power and he actually said what he thinks about the relations with the world, with Russia, with China, and everyone held their breath, suspecting that he would pay less attention to Europe, would actually let Europe deal with its problems on its own, and would prepare for the confrontation against the People's Republic of China. And then I thought that probably it would be right to call the bond with Europe not transatlantic, but rather Trump-Atlantic bond. But now everything has changed in a very dramatic way. Today or yesterday, Kiev Pravda, that's a mass media, an outlet in Ukraine, said that after the meeting in Avian with Zelensky, President Trump gave go-ahead to toughen sanctions against Russia and to somehow beef up the military strikes against Russia, including the deep strikes against Russia. And I do think that this is actually an attempt to somehow put a face of wishful thinking on the reality. You mentioned Anchorage summit meeting, and we spoke a lot about that. But before our Anchorage summit meeting, Witkoff had come to Russia, and he brought some specific propositions, and President Putin considered them. And at the summit meeting in Anchorage, he told President Trump that there are some nuances, but I accept your propositions. That was a compromise already. That was a compromise already. And now we are told look, we failed on that, so make more concessions. And we didn't do any concessions then. We just agreed on how to put an end to hostilities and how to start addressing other issues at the negotiations table. And we were confident enough that it would facilitate achieving the goals put forward by the president, but step by step. And it seemed then that we had a kind of an agreement, but a week or 2 weeks later, Donald Trump met the European leaders, and we saw that footage. And Zelensky somehow got some consultations. And until today, we don't have an answer to the American proposition that we supported. So this is how the situation looks like. And in the meantime, and I don't want to create any tensions, but still there are talks. Well, our American colleagues say that President Trump and President Putin have a kind of a chemistry that they're going to promote mutual interests, and national interests would look for convergence of those interests, and then our future is bright. But for Ukraine, that this is not our war, and under me it would never start. So let's put the blame on Joe Biden. And Ukraine was on top of the agenda. We have to remove Ukraine from the agenda. And we frankly thought that probably we removed that from the agenda back in Alaska. And the American proposition was about that, but in practice, after Alaska in September, I met Marco Rubio in New York and reminded him that we are looking forward to get a response. And he said, yes, we're working on that. There are some difficulties. There are some issues. Nevertheless, it was their proposition. And soon after our New York meeting, Joe Biden's initiated sanctions were prolonged, and Trump introduces new sanctions against Lukoil, Rosneft, and now Pentagon has created a new program for Ukraine. They are preparing a kind of a test site in the United States in order to pilot new warfare, bearing in mind the experience of the current war in Ukraine. And certainly there are no limitations except for physical ones in terms of selling arms to Europe so that it goes on pumping up Ukraine with weapons. So in practice, we didn't do anything positively. We cannot even get back our diplomatic property, let alone restoring direct flights. And in 2025, we suggested that all members of the Federal Assembly of Russia and of the US Congress are removed from the sanctions list. So practically it doesn't give anything. It would be just a kind of a token step. And we didn't get any response. And you won't believe it, the main problem in our relations with the United States, all of a sudden they announced that from now on, all children of the employees of the consulates who are going to be born in the United States would be considered American citizens, and they would be given certain certificates, and they would be free to cross the border only using their US passports as American citizens. And we said that this is a totally unclear practice. So they said that diplomatic relations and diplomatic conventions provide for a full immunity, and the consular convention doesn't provide for such an immunity. But That's a very unneeded question. It may never happen that in a family of a diplomatic worker of Russia, where a consular worker of Russia has that decision imposed on them, that their child becomes a U.S. citizen, and being on the territory of the U.S. has to follow only the U.S. laws. This is totally unprecedented, and this goes on against the backdrop that the U.S. Supreme Court now discusses the citizenship by the right of soil, so to say. But this is their domestic problem. It should not concern our diplomats and their children, so this is not our problem. But nevertheless, we are always open to a dialogue, and we appreciate very much, and I put jokes aside. Despite whatever I've said, and I could speak at length about that, nevertheless, we appreciate that the U.S. administration supports a dialogue. This is much better than just keeping silent and boost some fears. We are ready to continue our conversation. But on Ukraine, getting back to what we started with, we want to understand what has happened there at the Avian summit meeting, because if we trust Macron, so Anchorage agreements are totally destroyed, and the prodigal son is back to the family, I mean Trump, and now they all together once again. But the Americans didn't tell us what are their takeaways from that G7 summit meeting in Avian, and how they consider, how they see the results of that summit meeting, what the political line would be. As Yuri Yushakov and Dmitry Peskov said, we are discussing another visit of Witkoff and Kushner, and certainly we are ready to listen to them. Colleagues, the time lapses. One final question. Yes, please. Viktor Larin from the Russian Academy of Sciences, the Far Eastern Department, and the geography determines my question. What is the future of our relations with South Korea and Japan? And can we boost our relations at the educational and scientific track? Well, Japan and South Korea, we maintain our cultural ties. Japan hosts the Festival of the Russian Culture every year. We have some events held in South Korea. Our special envoy on cultural cooperation, Mikhail Shvitkoy, communicates to his counterparts, and that's very useful. Our tours to South Korea and Japan are very popular, very much demanded for. So those two countries behave very adequately. They do not sever cultural relations that should have nothing to do with politics, unlike what is going on in Italy with their disgraceful decisions to cancel pre-agreed tours of Trepko and Abrazakov. So we welcome what Japan and South Korea does. And there is another dimension which is much broader than Korea or Japan or the Far East. There are a lot of discussions going on, and probably you already discussed how to restore relations. And even Stubb, he recently said that NATO is getting back to its origin, just deterrence of Russia, containing Russia, and they don't care about the consistency of their statements. So, and he said that now we have to find a place for Russia in the new European security system, and you are familiar with this statement. Probably we have to think about that as well, not because we want to be hugged by someone or we want to embrace someone, but this is just because we're neighbors. We don't want Germany. Well, it deployed 5,000 military in Lithuania. We don't want Germany once again approach our borders. I quoted from Merz. He speaks about appeasing to an aggressor with reference to Putin. And I can quote from Merz, who immediately after he was appointed the chancellor, from the second attempt, but still made it, he said, "I will do my utmost that Germany once again becomes the main military might in Europe." And when he says once again, does he understand what it means, how it is perceived by those who defeated fascism, who would kill that ugly creature? But they are our neighbors. It means that we have to come to terms somehow. We don't want the future which is described by Macron, who came up with the European political community, which means the European Union, or the OSCE minus Russia and Belarus. And the United States is not part of that, so they don't care about that. So they met more than once, and they are preparing some concepts that then would be promoted within NATO and within the EU. And speaking about Ukraine, the essence is to stop it all, to start some endless negotiations that would never bring any fruits, to demand from Russia some demilitarized zone, but most importantly, to bring troops to what is left from Ukraine. And they frankly say that these would be the stabilizing forces. That's the core of the guarantees that Europe would give to Ukraine as the security guarantee. So this is another Berlin Wall for centuries to come. Is it what we are seeking now? We don't need anyone's hugs and embraces, but we need normal, civilized neighborhood that would be pragmatic, that would allow the business to get some benefits and would let the governments improve the social development in their countries. And the OSCE, certainly this is almost a dead organization. And along with Alexander Grushko, we discussed it. And this is up to the president to decide, but I would walk away from that organization personally. But for one obstacle, others would not walk out of that organization, would be alone. Well, it's still good to have a platform where you are slinged in mud, and where actually just in the literal sense, and you can quote some facts. And those who sling you in mud have nothing to respond to those facts. So we remain the members of the SCO, and when Secretary General of that organization offers some services, making the OSCE more acceptable for everyone, we sympathize with him. But the West would never allow that, because the West needs the OSCE. That would be just a place to criticize, to sling in mud. And my final statement would be the following, and I stem from what I said about South Korea and Japan. How can we work with the West? And just taking the United States as an example.
I said that they actively support the dialogue, proving optimistic forecasts. After we settle the situation in Ukraine and Russian American ties, will have a huge new impetus, turning into mutually reciprocal relations. But after Alaska case, and it seemed to us that it was particularly the moment to do so, and we need to offer the same compromise to Zelensky. We don't know whether Zelensky has been offered this compromise solution or not. There is no feedback. We don't know what that French would say. But simultaneously, along this break or pause in the Ukrainian resolution, there is a bigger economic pressure on us. I've given examples of sanctions against Rosneft, Lukoil, and their whole foreign business is a target for Americans to capture through the work in different countries, in the northern area of Africa, in Serbia, in Hungary, and other countries. Venezuela. Venezuela also has oil. And the country which had close ties in oil industry with Russia and China. Maduro was kidnapped. Unprecedented. In an unprecedented way, under the prerequisite that he was the head of drug trafficking. It's not about drug trafficking, it is about the oil industry in Venezuela, which is controlled by the Americans right now. Talking about the Strait of Hormuz, Trump says that something goes wrong, I will take under control and I will charge 20% fee. Oil as well. There is American doctrine or the strategy, I don't know the exact name. It's a big strategic blueprint document which set the task to dominate on global energy markets. Right now, Americans are negotiating. That's what we have been said to. They have a plan to buy out the European part of the Nord Streams, to revive and to take under control. Apart from our natural gas from Russia, it cannot move anything, so we will feed in our natural gas, but they will resell with a good markup. You know, why am I saying all these things? When and if this Ukraine case is resolved, we'll sit at the negotiating with our Americans, and you said so. You know, you've said you would discuss these plans, but then they would look at the map and say, listen, but everything has been taken around you. Only Alaska, where we have some mutual plans in gas industry, but we need to look at the reality. We don't have any reprimands to anyone. I'm just giving you the facts. Great Kipling, the colonialism, west to the west, east to the east, but even inside the west, there is west and the west. We are not the west. We are Eurasia. And so Eurasia has no way but should be independent. But we're ready to work with everyone how to get out of this global crisis. Sooner or later we will have to do that. So the first principle in response to the proposals, if it is not like ultimatum, actually this is the polite rudeness, plain rude, and that's what they learned their lesson from Zelensky. So we Ukrainians are not ready to put their position on the table. We listen to the Americans' positions and proposals. If there is room for improvement, we can do that. But so far, even details of our embassies, of our property work, there has been no progress. We shouldn't be moving from particular things to the common. I would move from the common things to the particular things. We will not agree on any global concepts. On separate matters, it is still possible. As an example, Iranian case, when it was initiated, there is an understanding that we are ready to assist and to help resolving this crisis. As for Ukraine, we'll see. We'll live and see. But this is a particular question. We see still obstacles. But, you know, the ball is on the other side. That's what I have said. After Alaska meeting, there is a problem with Palestine. Trump offered his initiative, Council of Peace for Gaza Strip. President Putin said that we will not join this Peace Council, but he said that you froze our billions. Officially, 1 billion can be allocated to the foundation to revive and the infrastructure in Palestine, housing, so on and so forth. But no feedback yet. you'll see football match between Russia and the United States. Fetisov and musicians, scientists. This is the particular case when we need to do that. Luna invited our deputy officials. She said they went to the United States. A lot of difficulties. There were some visa restrictions, and so forth. Small step. These small steps, which are not very remarkable, but it is better than nothing. At least kind of trust building, promotion of some contacts. But the common case should be resolved when? And some specialists in foreign policy and officials in foreign policy say, so why are you talking about these details? You cannot see the trees behind the forest. But we need to tackle this case with the trees, and then we can tackle the forest. Sergey Lavrov, thank you very much for very detailed, exhaustive, and absolutely honest answers to all the questions. I'd like to thank you a lot.